Hello, everyone. Hello to all three of you and to the audience listening to this online panel that UniFrance is organizing for the 2021 edition of the International Film Festival of Annecy on animation films, of course, and short film series and about writing, how we create, produce, and distribute internationally work for young audiences, and looking specifically at French specificity. And I am delighted to be here. I am Axel, Scoffier Deputy Director of UniFrance, and I have here present three panelists who are French professionals: Emmanuèle, Petry, Sirvin, who you are in fact a producer and distributor at Dandeloo. You distribute and produce series, special TV shows and shows around the world. And there are two films that are in the selection for the Annecy Film Festival. We also have Mattheiu. We have Rémi Chayé, who is a director of the wonderful film Calamity, who won a prize in Annecy. It was, you won a prize with Tout en haut du monde. And Calamity is the second film. So it's called Calamity, A Childhood of Martha Jane Canary. And Mattheiu Zeller, president of Octopolis and nWave Pictures, a Belgian company as well, working on with Bigfoot Family, which was presented, and Chicken Air as well, which will be released shortly. The first one is shown at Annecy. So all three of you, I hope we will have a great discussion and exchanges to know about how we can express a French spirit or European spirit in shows, whatever the format, in films, and to make sure that we touch our audiences. So we will try to see together how it is for a film director, first of all. So I will give the floor to you, to Rémi Chayé, and you can talk about Calamity or come back to Tout en haut du monde if you wish to. And you are going to tell us how you make a film for a young audience. What about the writing, perhaps? Does it happen right from the beginning? How did you evolve from one film to the next? And please tell us how you worked on it. So for me, it started from an experience after Tout en haut du monde, an experience in cinema theaters. I went to meet children who had watched the film, and with a lot of screenings, and I noticed that children were even younger than I expected. We thought the film would be made for children 7 years and over, and I realized that there were a lot of 4- or 5-year-olds in the movie theaters. And when there was a Q&A session, we saw that some hadn't understood the film at all. And some asked me if we could defreeze the grandfather, for example. So they hadn't really this relationship to the film or to the death of they had understood the death of the grandfather. So when I wrote Calamity with Fabrice and Sandra, and with the help of Claire Lacombe and Henri Magalon from Maybe Movies, we thought about how we could bring people to the films, or how we could create interesting points for the children so they could understand it, and for the young audiences. And that way they could understand it through the relation with animals, Pique the dog, namely, and different scenes with a lot of animals. You see her taking care of the horse, for example. So it was really touch points for them that they could relate to. and we had a lot of scenes with the dog, and I realized that this animal was very attractive, and I had to plan certain scenes like entry points for the younger kids. So we didn't change anything about the characters, or we didn't forbid anything. We were writing for children, so everything was thought for children, and we tried to see things as through children's eyes. Nothing changed, but there, of course, this thus having a certain complexity in our characters, but we needed something that was accessible for the younger ones. And each time, I believe that when you go to the movie theaters, to the screenings, and when you meet the children, it's a wonderful, a very rich experience, enriching experience. So the main target in the beginning of the film, was it similar to the hero in the film? 7 years old, I guess. And I guess often in animation films, the main character is often the same as the target audience age. So yes, Claire Paoletti, the scriptwriter who wrote the original script, for her, the question was to have a hero who was a little older, perhaps, and it wasn't as obvious when we created Tout en haut du monde. We had a girl who was 14, 15 years old, and how could younger children identify to her? But it worked. So it is true that it's a film that has a point of view. It's Sacha's point of view in Tout en haut du monde, and it's the same for Calamity. We are always looking through Carla Jane's eyes, and this enables us to oblige the camera, or to look as if through the children's eyes. So the camera needs to be at the height of the children's eyes. And of course, and I believe that this is also true in the writing of the script as well. It needs to be understandable. Yes, absolutely. These are necessary questions to rewrite the script at times, because if it's too adult-like, we need to rewrite, and there were things that we explained at times, itinerary issues or chief issue, and we had to reintegrate these issues, but seen through from a more childlike perspective. And when we see that the chief had a son, there was a conflict with the convoy chief and Martha, and this conflict had to be seen through the children's eyes, and that way you need to bring the adult issues, but they're accessible for children. And for the graphic decisions or choices, and does this is it in line with the target that you had in terms of ages and children? The choices that you made aesthetically? No, for the graphic style, in fact, to say the truth, I believe that the graphic style of Tout en haut du monde and Calamity, to a certain extent, is more adult than we could expect. So with CinemaScope and at times dark lights for Le Monde, we did not hesitate to film, or we didn't really, when we created the frame and during the storytelling, we didn't ask ourselves if we needed to film simpler shots or more frontal shots. No, that is for the values. What was important was blood and weapons. That was what was important. And for the rest, I believe that we filmed in an adult way. In fact, if or at least we're not asking ourselves any questions about it. And a last question, perhaps, then we'll go to other films, move on to, but what about the integration for young audiences, contemporary audiences, and a story that takes place in the far west? Did you wonder about their culture of this world, this with a lot of codes that are known to adults, but perhaps less known by the young?
Le projet du film était, pour tout dire, était de pas
Yes,
faire un
we
western.
didn't want to
Ça,
make a
c'était en tout cas
Western.
mon
That
idée
was
de départ.
my idea to start with.
C'est ce que j'avais dit à
That's what I
Henri
told Henri. In fact,
quand on a
when we
démarré le projet,
started
c'était j'ai dit: «Moi,
working
je
on
veux
the
pas faire un
project,
western
I
parce
told
que
him
j'ai une
I don't
vision
want to make a
assez
Western because
simpliste et
I have a very
assez
simplistic
bête
vision
du
of
western que je
Westerns
vois comme
that I
surtout des
see
histoires de
as
vengeance, des histoires assez
revenge
machistes,
stories, macho
un côté,
stories, or
glorification de faire justice par
stories
soi-même
with
sont des
the
choses qui me plaisent pas
glorification of
beaucoup. Voilà, donc
self-revenge.
j'ai pas et en plus
And in
j'ai pas ça
fact,
dans mon
that's
ADN,
not something I have in my DNA. And
j'avais pas la télé à
I
la
didn't
maison,
have TV at home.
j'ai jamais
A TV at
eu
home,
vu
I
la
never
dernière
saw
séance,
La Dernière Séance, a
à la
TV
téloche, du
show
coup
with old films,
j'ai
playing old
pas
films.
vu beaucoup
And
de
so I didn't
westerns et ça
see
c'était
a
pas
lot of
quelque chose dans le
Westerns.
projet, il y
And
avait
in the
pas,
project,
l'idée de
we
jouer
didn't have
avec les
the
codes.
idea of
Voilà,
playing with
donc
these
c'était vraiment
codes.
hors du projet. Ce qui m'intéressait,
What
c'était
I was
vraiment
interested
d'avoir
in
un
was having
convoi,
a
un espèce de
convoy
village sur
and
roue, un
a
village qui avance dans un
rolling,
paysage
moving village, so to
d'avoir,
speak,
le paysage qui
and
change
having
et
a
les gens qui,
different
se raccrochent
landscape that evolved
à une
around them,
façon, très
and
séparée de voir les
and
gens,
a,
quoi, avec
a
des hommes qui sont en
way
noir avec des
of
chapeaux et des femmes
looking
qui sont
at
en
people
couleur,
in a
plus
different
claire
way. We
avec
had
des robes, de façon
the
à
men with
mettre
the
Martha
dark
Jane qui va
clothes
jouer
and other
sur
the
le genre
women
et
with
qui
the
va jouer
lighter
sur les
colored
stéréotypes de
clothes, and
genre,
Martha Jane, who
passer de l'un
was
à
going to
l'autre,
move
jouer
from one group to the
plutôt
other
sur
and
cette
play on
frontière-là.
that border,
Et donc
that
on avait exagéré un petit
separation.
peu
And
donc c'était
this
ça
is
qui
what I was
m'intéressait
interested in
à la racine du de jouer
from the
avec les codes.
beginning,
Je voulais
rather
pas
than playing on
de
the
plan au
codes. I
bras du
didn't want
Stetson, je voulais pas de duel, je voulais
shots,
pas de
close-ups
village
on
rue,
the
comme
hats,
on
for
peut voir dans Lucky
example,
Luke ou dans beaucoup de
or
westerns, qui sont de
other
toute façon des
specific
westerns qui
shots
se passent
that
plus
you see
tard,
in
mais
Lucky
vraiment
Luke,
assez
for
tôt, hein,
example, and
dans cette étape
so
de
we
conquête des territoires
we didn't want
états-uniens. Et
to
donc,
do that
voilà,
as
il y avait pas
for
à
the
l'époque,
conquest of these
il y avait pas
Indian
les villages qu'on peut
territories.
voir dans Lucky Luke. Donc voilà,
So
c'était presque en
it was
opposition que
almost in
je me suis
opposition that
positionné par
I
rapport à ça.
positioned
Et donc
myself, and
on ne
we
cherchait pas
weren't looking
à évoquer ça
to
auprès des
uh,
adultes. Et
mention
pour ceux
these
qui aient
themes
des
for the
enfants
adults.
qui
And
comprennent qu'est-ce que c'est que la
for
route de
children,
l'Oregon,
what do they understand about
qu'est-ce
the
que faisaient ces
route to
pionniers ici,
Oregon?
on essaye,
What
comme
about
on fait
being a
dans toute équipe, on
pioneer?
essaye de passer
We
des
try
infos
to
discrètement, comme ça, dans
pass
les
on
dialogues, dans les
information
problématiques,
through
de
the
façon
dialogue,
à ce qu'ils aient
but
des repères qui
subtly,
leur permettent
so
de
that
suivre
they could
l'histoire et de
have
savoir ce que
landmarks
font
and
ces gens-là.
to be able to follow the story and know who the people are.
Peut-être du coup,
Maybe then
pour basculer
we'll
sur
move
un
on
autre
to
format, est-ce que
another
Emmanuel,
format. Could
sur vos
Emmanuel,
productions,
you tell us about
comment
your
les
productions and
programmes,
or your
séries que vous
films or
distribuez,
programs, series that you
ça joue,
distribute?
j'imagine, différemment entre,
I
par exemple,
believe things
les
are
diffuseurs. Vous
different.
avez des
You
cibles par
have
catégorie de
specific
programmes.
targets for your
Comment
different
vous travaillez avec vos
programs.
auteurs,
How do you work with your
vos
authors,
équipes artistiques
your artistic teams,
pour faire exister
in order to
des enjeux par rapport à des jeunes publics? Est-ce qu'il y a
bring
des
to
difficultés
life
par
your
rapport aux équipes?
objectives?
Je vais
Or
rebondir sur Rémi parce que
I'll
le western
like to
nous tend une
answer
perche
because
énorme
since Rémi talked about the
on est en production
Western,
avec Billy le
we're
hamster cowboy
in production for
dans
Billy
notre
the
studio
Cowboy
Voisins à
Hamster,
Valence et
and
la question s'est
the
posée très fortement
question
avec France Télévisions parce que c'est eux
was
qui avaient
present
cette
with
commande de
France
série
Television
et
because
au départ
they
d'abord on a eu un
asked
non
for
dès le
this
début
series.
en
We had
disant les enfants ne connaissent pas
a
le western. Alors
no
ça me fait rire
first because
d'entendre
they
du côté
said
cinéma
no, children do not
les
know
enfants ne
about
connaissent pas le
Westerns.
western, c'est des codes plus aucun
These
enfant
are
aujourd'hui ne maîtrise
codes
en
that
cowboy donc
no
ça leur
children
ne
have
parlera pas du tout.
today.
Donc on s'est
And
quand même penché
cowboys,
sur eux
they won't
là-dessus.
understand at all. So
Et
we
finalement, donc, on fait la série avec
looked
eux et
into
on est tous
that, and
tombés
finally
d'accord
we
pour dire
made
que le
the
western
series
n'était
with
pas
them
cinéma,
and
mais que c'était un
agreed
décor.
that Western, it's
Mais ça va
just
beaucoup plus
a
loin que ça parce
landscape
que toi, tu en as pas parlé,
decor.
Rémi, mais nous,
It's
on
just
a
a
on s'est rendu
setting,
compte.
and
D'abord, c'est
therefore
fascinant de voir
it's
à quel point les Français aiment
fascinating
le
to see
western parce qu'on est
how
entre Lucky Luke et
much
enfin, on a un truc
French people
intransable qui est
love
le monde
Westerns. It's
des
incredible.
pionniers.
And the
Et
world of pioneers as
Billy,
well.
on s'en aperçoit
And
vraiment très très
with
fort parce
Billy,
que
this is
la vraie
extremely
problématique
noticeable. It's
du
very
western,
clear. The
c'est l'indianitude. On
problematic
a inventé
in
ce mot-là chez nous.
Westerns,
Je ne sais
it's
pas si ça
about
existe.
Indians. I
C'est
don't
les Native
Native
Americans ou
American
les peuples
Indians
premiers ou je sais pas
or
quoi. Et en fait, ça met le doigt
and
vraiment.
this
Au
really
départ, c'est ce que je racontais
sh-
à Axel. Au départ, on
puts
avait
a
une petite
finger, it
indienne
really
parce que l'idée
highlights
de Billy, c'est qu'il veut
the
devenir un
Indians. But
cowboy.
there's a little
Il
Indian
rêve
girl, Billy wants to
d'être
become a
dog et devenir un
cowboy,
cowboy.
and her best friend was an Indian girl. And for us, it was fine. She had a feather in her head. It was quite charming. She healed people with plants. But by speaking about it with Canada, I'm going back, in fact, because we're producing and distributing. So we are speaking regularly with the broadcasters and distributors. So it's very interesting because I have to pitch my projects at a very early stage. And we realized very quickly that in Canada, and the States, even in South America, these Indian populations, native Indians, it's still very sensitive. I didn't think it would be. When you pronounce the name Indian, people want to shoot you because it's taboo. But so what we did is we decided to co-produce with Canadians, with real native Indians. So I had to find a special production company. And since it's the only company as such, they are overwhelmed with projects, and we removed the feather. The grandmother is not an Indian in front of a teepee, her teepee. So it's quite sad, in fact, to get rid of all these representations. So we didn't understand what the problem was. No, people said, okay, that's fine, but there are things you cannot touch. And in France, we are very free. Of course, we are not talking about Algeria here. We are talking about their problem, a problem that of the North America. But we have great freedom in France, and we take advantage of this freedom. But it is true that our system is fabulous. We have the CNC that supports us. And this is why people outside of France are very jealous of the system. People tell us, okay, you can write anything you like because money is just pouring in. But this is why we have such great diversity, I'd like to say. And we produce and distribute special units, 28 minutes, with topics that are very serious, such as terrorism, becoming an orphan, or Shum, who loses his brother, for example. Maman pleut des cordes talks about nervous breakdown, depression, and we have adaptation of books at times. So what we do is we're able to finance 75% of these beautiful works that are, but we are confronted internationally to issues. It means personally, most of the buyers for public services say, oh, it's so beautiful, I love it. When Shum won its 37th prize yesterday, these are works that are acknowledged formally, artistically, culturally, etc. I had buyers who said, Shum made me cry. We watched it 25 times with my kids. So I say, great, so you're going to buy it for your channel. And they said no. And they said, yes, I love it, but it's impossible to show it. It's too sad. But Shum's Odyssey is not the most film, in fact. No, what is absurd is ABC in Australia said, it's wonderful, I showed it to my kids, but I can't buy it because we had wildfires, a lot of animals died, and we cannot tell children that animals die in forests because it will revive this trauma. So we are not talking directly to children, we talk to broadcasters, and sometimes there is this, they're afraid to lose audience, market share, and most of the channels do not want to take any risks. So at times we can compromise, and it happens for these programs, as for Maman pleut des cordes, because we can pretend it's a special Christmas show, and that way they can find a space to show it. For these Odyssée de Choum, I understand there's a lot of work. Claire Paoletti, collaborators, they showed nature with a lot of different codes and a lot of writing to marvel, to bring, but with a more mature audience, what happens for the director when he imagines he's going to show it to the audience. So what can I use? What technique must I use? What are, in terms of directing, to soften the message that I'm writing about? Because it is a film for young audiences, despite the difficulties for buyers and diffusers. Yes, we are very proud of having co-produced it. We gave Hugo great freedom, and we really let them do their own film, but the subject is that of depression. It's not a word that we want to pronounce. We try not to pronounce it, and we say it's just a little girl who goes visit her grandmother, but the mother needs to go to the hospital. So I do not pronounce the D word of depression, but even people who know about it, they say the subject is too serious, despite the humor in the film. But I think in France, we are used to a certain rhythm for Maman peut des cordes. We are used to you have the gray clouds. It takes time, a few minutes to meet the mother. And diffusers said, certain broadcasters said, if it doesn't go fast enough, it won't work. But we are more contemplative in France. We have another series with 9 episodes and a great platform. I won't name it, but it's a half-hour project. It's an adaptation of a novel. It's for Canal+. And one of the great platforms told us, wait a second, we can do it in just 4 episodes. They said, they used the word stickiness to talk about it. They said, okay, the person watching it must stick to the program immediately after 1 or 2 episodes, otherwise. But another taboo word in television is contemplation. You cannot use it. So we are moving away from the platforms. We want to stay faithful to the work, but we need to find compromises. We need to be as faithful as possible to a director, an idea, a vision, a film. But when confronted to other countries, it's very violent. It's very difficult. Some people say we just want something beautiful, colored. Is it a concept, round and colored? So bubblegum, really. Another channel said, we want bubblegum. Yeah, that's what we want. So for Maman Plus des Cordes, of course, it doesn't work. It's not a chewing gum. It's colorful, yes. With Jean-Baptiste, we are sure that you need to love a project. We really want to bring home programs we are proud of, and we try to compromise the least possible. The model in France is different with French broadcasters, but with a possibility for films or series or specials to be put together as projects, and then but it also is like pre-financing in feature films that we see, and the risk-taking for authors. So Mattheiu, maybe we can move on to you, and about with your productions, your models, it's a different path, because your DNA is very international in the beginning, but the conception, the design is also involved in distribution. And so do you have other solutions, ways of working? How do you address your audience, your young audiences. Yes, in what Rémi and Emmanuel said, there are common points as well and similarities. Our films are indeed films that are made for wide audiences internationally, and our economy relies on the pre-sales of our films internationally. And so this is our DNA. And we rely on the financing system, the French and Belgian systems, which are absolutely not enough to finance our films. So our DNA and our on international sales. So the films need to correspond to these audiences. And we are in film, and these are audiences. So we need a 5-year-old to love the film, understand it, and find reasons to be amused, moved, to enjoy it, have fun. But it's also for parents, grandparents, teenagers, and we want them to enjoy it as much. So yes, for them to enjoy it, appreciate the film. So we do have constraints in during the writing, aesthetical constraints as well. And it is true that the cinema animation culture is different depending on the different geographic areas. There's Asian animation films, which is very strong, Japanese animation. We also have the great American studios, Disney, and the more recent actors as well, and European animation films. So we have the ambition to be a mix of all of it, a sort of melting pot. And our mode, functioning mode, is closer to that of the American studios, very integrated with the teams and a writing in the wide sense that continues during the creative process of the film. And I think that's true for any animated film, animation film. It's the writing continues with, of course, a very strong European influence, since the majority of artists and teams are European and French and Belgium for most of them. And these are people who are fed with this culture from the schools or graphic arts, or we have a very strong DNA, European DNA, but a desire to be able to touch all markets. Emmanuel underlined it. There are specificities and cultural sensitivities, different understandings of different subjects. And what we do is try not to give up on the strong messages in our films, but try to find what is universal in these subjects. We try to find a common point, but not the smallest. Otherwise, you have something weak and without any strength. But we try to find common points that can be understood by all. And we, of course, we find out that there are elements at times that are stronger than for certain countries, certain cultures, and less for others. So when we talk about the English Queen's dog, it is something that is known around the world, of course, an archetype that is British and known everywhere, but stronger, of course, in Great Britain than elsewhere. But the film worked everywhere, so we succeeded to do it. We wanted people were sensitive to the first degree, the dog in Buckingham Palace, and sometimes other people understood the third degree humor. And so it's the same issues that Rémi mentioned or Emmanuèle mentioned as well. So there are different levels in reading, visibility for the different audiences. We talked about it before. How can the international support, or what is the role it plays upstream, and when you have feedback, even from the very beginning with the script, when you present your script? Well, we decided to integrate our film distribution. So we distribute ourselves and we pre-sale our NY is producing its 10th film in 12 years. So we have a history, long history, and we have distributors who are with us, who've been working with us for a long time, people we know well, and we do not just sell films to them. We all work on them with the distributions, when the films come out, and all the marketing, and we also deliver a marketing package, which is crucial when we really want a film to have strong performances in the different countries. So this is part of the game. And just as Emmanuel, I pitch my films and I do it very early. And we get feedback from that. And for all the new films, because we support the film distribution, it really feeds our database. It's in our head, in fact, and we know who we're working, but it feeds onto our experience to avoid mistakes. Because of course we can make little mistakes that and these mistakes help us learn and improve our work, because we have an integrated model with teams that have been working with us for many years, and therefore very experimented teams, very close together, close-knit. And the production, writing, development, distribution, support for it's all the same people. It's not separate. They're not really under the same roof, but there's one entity with a very close team which exchanges a lot. It's interesting because in the specificities that you said, the French specificities, but European specificities, we have an ecosystem for financing and a space of liberty that it provides, and freedom provided to the talents, to the directors, but also there's a know-how within the teams, whether French or European, and we already talked about it together, but we know it because there are schools and we have abundant productions in film, and there are animation schools that are, Rémi, you had said things when we prepared this meeting about know-how in animation, and perhaps you too. So yes, I often wonder about what is the specificity in Europe, in French, in animation films. It's difficult for me to answer the question, because when you're part of it, it's difficult to notice the specificities. Or what I know and what we analyzed with some friends is that there's a know-how about making films with tools, and I'm really talking about data, series with a mix of puppets, 2D puppets and drawings. So this is something that we don't see in Japan at all, and very little in the United States, a little bit for underground series, but there's a French culture and teams who are really used to these techniques like flash, and they know how to make big volumes for series and really quality work in animation. And it's
c'est vrai que ça va un petit
It's
peu
true
vers la
that
Belgique,
there's
ça
a
va
little
aussi
of
de
this
quelques
in
équipes
Belgium
au
as well,
Danemark.
in Denmark.
Il y a
There
des
are
gens en
people in
Suisse qui se forment
Switzerland who are
sur nos films
training
quand
others
on les
and
prend, qui ont
who are
des habitudes
trained, and
de dessin,
they
même si
have
c'est
a
des
good
dessins digital, mais
digital
qui se
technique
forment un
in
petit peu à la
drawing
marionnette, qui
and
voient
that are trained to
tous
use
les
puppets as
avantages
well,
que ça
and
permet
they can see all
en
the
termes
advantages this can provide
d'efficacité.
in terms of
Mais voilà,
efficiency.
je suis assez
So I'm
fasciné
fascinated
par
by
cette
this
spécificité technique,
technical
quoi, une sorte de
specificity, this niche.
dans lequel nos films existent.
Ouais, moi, je m'aperçois, pardon,
I realized I'm
en fonction de
jumping
tes
in
questions
to
aussi,
answer your
qui revient de
question
quand on me
because
dit aussi
when
c'est
I'm
trop
told
français,
it's too French,
ça me fait toujours rigoler
I'm
évidemment.
makes me laugh.
Et du coup, en essayant de
So
pousser un
when
petit peu
you
plus loin
want to
dans la
go
discussion avec
further
les
in the
diffuseurs à
discussion with
l'international, ce
the
qui revient le plus,
broadcasters,
c'est quand
what
on dit
comes
beaucoup qu'on
back
est artsy.
is that we're
C'est un
artsy.
terme qui
That's
revient sans
a word
arrêt,
that
donc
comes
ça veut
up
dire ce
all
que ça
the
veut dire. Bah,
time.
c'est un côté,
So
j'imagine, non
does it mean
commercial,
it's
ça voudrait
maybe it
dire,
means
et
it's
aussi qu'on soit très bavard.
non-commercial,
On nous
and
dit que
there's
les Français en parlent beaucoup
it's very
dans les séries
talkative. That's
et
what
que ça
we're
clash.
told.
Donc c'est juste pour
It's
essayer de
too
trouver
talkative.
des réponses à cette
So
question. Qu'est-ce qui fait
yes,
qu'on
to find answer to
peut-être
this
qu'on parle
question,
aussi
maybe
Pourtant,
we do
tu
talk
le disais
a
que,
lot.
comme
You
Octopolis,
said
qui est
for
effectivement
a series
dans son graphisme et dans son
with
identité
a certain
de très
identity,
grande qualité
graphic, with high
et du coup un peu
quality,
différent à la
which is
française,
different and very
souvent fonctionne très bien
French-like, it,
sur des
it is
chaînes
sold perfectly
commerciales mondiales.
well around
oui,
the
une chaîne
world.
commerciale comme Tiny
Yes,
Pop
for a
qui
channel like
appartient à
Tiny
Sony au
Pop
UK,
that belongs to
quand
Sony
c'est
in the
leur
UK,
je suis
I
encore
sold Pompon,
ébahie.
and I'm really astonished by
À
that.
vrai
In
dire,
fact, I'm
l'acheteuse est
still,
française,
the
donc ça
buyer
peut
is
aider
French,
quand
so
même. Elle
maybe
habite à Londres, elle est
perhaps that
française.
has helped.
Je suis pas sûre
I don't know how I would have
si c'était
succeeded
pure
if it
British,
was
parce que
they were
comme je te le
purely
disais,
British.
les séries françaises, c'est un peu le
For
demi-caviar
French
pour les
series,
British, malheureusement.
they're
Ils
not
ont
too well
l'impression
liked.
aussi qu'on
Usually,
écrit,
they
qu'on sait pas
believe we
écrire.
don't know how to
Ce que je voulais
write.
dire aussi, c'est
And
que
what I
ça fait
wanted
quand
to
même un
say
certain
is
nombre
that
d'années
now,
maintenant
for a
que je
certain
bosse
number of
dans
years,
ce
I've been
milieu
working
et
in
que les séries
this
françaises
field,
des années
and in
80,
the 80s,
elles, elles sont quand même très, très, très typées,
series
très vieillottes,
are
très
now
mal
have
vieillies.
the
Tous ces
series from that
personnages
time has
hyper réalistes,
aged. They
etc.
were
Et j'ai l'impression qu'on a
very
fait un bond
realistic.
en
I
avant
feel that
monstrueux dans
we've
les 20 dernières années,
really
que ce soit au
evolved
niveau du graphisme,
tremendously
du travail
in the
de
10
Rémi ou de Benjamin Shaw,
years with
etc.
Benjamin
Il y a des
Shaw, for
vraies
example. There
visions
are real
artistiques
artistic
illustratives qui
visions that
émergent,
are
qui ont
emerging
émergé.
and that have
Au niveau de
emerged already
l'écriture, grâce au
with the
CEA, aux écoles
writing and
des coiffures, on s'est rendu
with the
compte à
film
quel point on avait
schools.
besoin de
When
retravailler
we
l'écriture.
for the
On pensait
writing,
que c'était
sorry,
un
when we realized
peu
we had to
ni fait
rework
ni à
on the
faire à l'époque
writing,
et qu'il y a eu
and we
un
had
énorme
a lot
travail et
of
je
work
trouve
put into
que
that.
on
We
a énormément amélioré la
have
qualité de nos séries, je
improved
trouve,
the quality of
de
our
manière beaucoup
series,
plus forte
and
que les États-Unis ou le
in a
Japon, qui sont quand même
stronger
des meilleurs,
way,
qui sont
even
restés,
more
qui étaient
so
déjà
than
au
in
top,
the
hein,
United
qui sont
States.
restés,
Those
mais nous, on
series
a
were
fait,
at
je
the top
pense,
already,
un
but
bond en
I think
avant
we have
énorme.
really made tremendous
Bon,
progress.
c'est pas de
It's
l'autoglorification
not
parce que
to
c'est pas moi qui dessine et qui
self-glorify
écris, donc je fais que le
us, but
constater.
it's just something
Mais
I've
finalement,
noticed.
maintenant, quand tu dis c'est
And
arty,
when
c'est
they
plus un
say it's
compliment
artsy, I think
que
it's more
réellement
of a compliment in the end
une barrière.
than an
Après,
obstacle.
évidemment, ça ne
But
correspond
it
pas à ce qu'ils
doesn't
cherchent forcément,
necessarily
mais
correspond to
on n'a
what
pas à rougir de ce
they
qu'on
are
fait.
looking for. But we don't,
Voilà.
we shouldn't be ashamed of what
On est
we
dans un
are
registre
doing.
différent, hein, parce
Our
on nous a
register
jamais
is
exigé d'être
slightly
trop arty, hein,
different.
sur nos films. On est dans un registre
We
3D
are
qui
working
aille
in
plus proche
3D
de l'esthétique
and
d'un
closer
film de studio.
to
Donc,
studio
d'un
films
point de vue graphique, je dirais.
in terms of
Donc, il y a
graphics.
une reconnaissance de
So
la
there's
qualité, mais
a
surtout,
recognition
on
of the
peut dire qu'à
quality, but
l'international, le fait qu'on soit
internationally, the fact
européen,
that we are
franco-belge, en
European,
l'occurrence, est un
Franco-Belgian,
atout.
is
Clairement, on
is
reconnaît à la
is
France et à la
positive,
Belgique et à l'Europe une
is
vraie
really
qualité
an asset.
cinématographique, une vraie qualité
There's a
artistique.
real artistic
Et malgré
quality,
tout, enfin, moi, même
and
si on fait
even
des
if
films qui
our
sont
films
très
are very
universels,
universal,
je
I
pense qu'il y a une
believe
touche
there's a
européenne dans nos
European
films, dans nos
touch
histoires.
in
Bigfoot Family,
Bigfoot
qui a été
Family, for
un
example,
carton
which
sur
was a great
Netflix
success
aux
on
États-Unis et au
Netflix in the
Canada,
United
et en
States and
Angleterre
Canada,
d'ailleurs,
as
donc
well as
très bien.
England.
Je ne suis pas certain
I'm
je suis à peu près certain que le public
almost
ne sait
sure
pas
that the
nécessairement
audience
que c'est un
doesn't
film
know
français ou
that it's a
belge,
French or
mais en
Belgian film,
revanche,
but
perçoit, et
on
ça
the
c'est
other
très certain
hand,
parce que les commentaires ont
we
éclairé, que c'est
received
pas un film
comments, but they
américain.
know
J'en
it's
suis
not an
surpris dans son
American
discours, dans
film,
sa
because
manière de traiter
in the
l'histoire,
storytelling,
même dans son côté un peu
in
militant d'ailleurs, et à quelque chose d'européen, de
in
fondamentalement
its
européen. Et ça, c'est quelque
activist
chose qu'on essaye de
aspect, it's
cultiver.
something that's more
Voilà, notre prochain
French, and this
film,
is something we try to
enfin,
cultivate
ça, c'est
for
le
our
film sur lequel on est en
French,
train de
our
travailler,
future
c'est
films.
une réinterprétation
we are working on a reinterpretation of Don Quixote. It's a European adaptation. We are going to work on it with the tools that are universal,
mais voilà, il y a un
but
ADN quand même.
we still have our DNA.
Surtout, on a des
And
équipes
our
qui sont
teams
spécifiques, alors
are
qui sont parfois,
teams
ont souvent été des
who
Français
were
formés en
often
France,
French
en
people
Europe,
trained
qui ont
in
parfois
France or Europe,
travaillé
and then
chez
worked
Disney, chez
with
Pixar,
Disney or
qui ont été en
Pixar,
Australie,
sometimes in
enfin, quelques petits noms
Australia,
qui ont travaillé
in Asia as
qui à un
well.
moment donné
And
reviennent en
then at
Europe avec les
some time they
expériences,
come back to
qui sont très
France, and they're
heureux et
very
particulièrement heureux de travailler
happy to
au
work
sein d'une équipe
within
francophone,
a French-speaking
européenne, avec des
team
valeurs
with
communes,
common
avec des
values
gens
and
qui sont
people
issus
who
d'une
have the
culture commune.
same
Ils ont des techniques qu'ils ont acquises,
values, the
une
same
expérience qu'ils ont acquise partout dans le monde,
experience.
mais
They have
avec un
traveled
état d'esprit,
around
y
the
compris dans la
world,
manière de travailler
but they
d'ailleurs,
have a certain
très
mindset. They're
collaboratif,
very
très
collaborative,
puis un peu
and they
familial
like to
aussi,
work
qui est,
with a
voilà,
family-like team,
différent de ce qu'ils ont pu
which is
connaître
different
ailleurs.
from what they have known.
Rémi,
And Rémi, for
Calamity,
Calamity, the way in which you integrated the international point of view, I believe that was with the producers, the question of the representation of the United States for the future distribution of the film. Did you have to really acknowledge their point of view, or what happened with the creative teams?
Alors, c'est vrai que c'était une
Yes, there was a
inquiétude pour,
worry
notamment pour
for
Henri,
Henri,
quand il a,
especially
comme
as
Mattheiu et Emmanuèle
Mattheiu
pitchaient
and
très en amont
Emmanuel said,
l'histoire,
they
parce que je
pitched
lui
the
avais juste parlé
story
de l'idée
upstream very
et
early, at the
il
very
était
early
vraiment
stage.
partant quand on s'est
He,
retrouvés à Los
when we were
Angeles
in
par deux
Los
fois et à
Angeles
San Francisco
twice, and
pour
then
aller
San
présenter le
Francisco to
film chez
present the
Pixar.
film at Pixar,
Et c'est vrai
it
que
is true
Henri
that
tout de
Henry
suite parlait
immediately
du
spoke of
projet
the
et interrogeait
project
tous
and
les gens
asked
qui pouvaient
people, anyone he
sur cette
could,
idée
to see what they thought
d'Européens qui
about this
prendraient,
European
qui
point of
représenterait
view and
un personnage de la
representing
tradition américaine,
typical
Calamity Jane.
American
Et
characters
donc,
such as Calamity
à la fois, il
Jane.
s'inquiétait, je ne sais pas
So
s'il
he
s'inquiétait, mais
was worried about
il
this, or
essayait
at
d'ouvrir
least he
toutes les
tried
antennes de
to
producteurs
really
pour savoir comment réagissaient les gens.
understand
Et a
how
priori, bon,
people
voilà,
would
ce qu'il en a
react, and
retenu,
then what
c'était une
he
bienveillance. C'est-à-dire qu'ils
understood that,
avaient
that
absolument
there
rien
was a
contre,
lot
ils ne
of
voyaient pas
benevolence, in
de
fact, and
problème
he didn't see any
spécialement
major problem or
qu'on
issue for
fasse ça,
us
quoi.
to
Ça les
work on
choquait
this
pas.
project. This
Et
wasn't
ça, c'est dans un
shocking for
premier
them.
temps. Et
So
ensuite,
that
la
was
façon
the
de
first
travailler
thing.
de
And
Maybe
then
Movies,
for Maybe Movies,
c'est d'intégrer,
they tend
de
to
faire venir les
integrate the
partenaires,
partners,
France 3
France 3, for
et
example,
Indie Sales
and
et
Indie
Backup
Sales
sur l'animatique.
for the
Et donc,
animatics. And what they
ils regardent
do is that they
l'animatique, ils
look at
regardent
the
le
animatics,
scénario,
they
ils
look at
regardent
the script,
l'animatique et ils font
and
des retours.
they
Et
provide feedback.
du coup, c'est
So
lors de
during
retour,
the
notamment
feedback,
d'Indie Sales,
Indie
qui a
Sites,
une pleine
namely,
conscience du marché
we
international,
were
qu'on a eu des
conscious
retours effectivement
of this
sur un
international
certain nombre de
aspect,
points
and they informed us
du film et on a pu faire des petits aménagements
of
pour
points
éviter,
that
mais c'était en
we
l'occurrence
could improve,
plus sur des questions
but it was more about
d'inclusion,
in
parce que finalement, nous, on
being
avait une
inclusive.
fin qui était
Our
assez
ending
canaille,
was
avec une Calamity qui était un
a
petit peu dure.
harsh type of Calamity
Et c'est vrai
Jane,
que
and
Eleonore de
Eleanor
Indie Sales nous
in
avait
the
dit
sales
il
said,
faudrait que ce soit
"Oh,
à ce moment-là que ce soit
we
inclusif, il
wanted to
faudrait
be more
qu'on puisse
inclusive
avoir un
and
garçon
have perhaps a
qui revient vers
boy who
Calamity de manière un petit peu plus
goes back towards
un peu plus
Calamity in a
sympa,
nicer
de façon à ce que
way,
les
so that
garçons
boys
puissent se dire on
would
n'est pas que des méchants. Enfin,
be
voilà. Donc
looked
c'était plus sur ce mode-là
as
que sur
nice
les
as
filles
well, not
américaines,
as bad
parce
boys
que nous, on partait avec deux
only.
problèmes
And
essentiels
we had two
qui sont quand on travaille avec les États-Unis
specific
du
issues when
20e
we
siècle,
worked with
c'était effectivement
on the United
l'esclavage
States of the 19th century. It's
et les Native
slavery
Americans. Et
and
donc,
Native
ces
Americans.
deux problématiques,
So
alors comme nous, en
these
plus, notre
two
problématique, elle est la
aspects,
problématique du
these two
genre.
themes, we worked also
Quand
on
il faut choisir ses
gender
combats,
films. So
c'est-à-dire
you
qu'on ne
need
pouvait
to
pas à la
choose
fois
what
faire un
you're
film
going to
sur
work on. We
l'esclavage,
couldn't
un
work on
film sur les Native
slavery,
Americans
on
et un film
Native,
sur
and on
sur les
gender
genres.
as well.
Et donc, on évoque,
So
et
we
on met de côté
mention these themes,
ces
of course,
problématiques
but we put them
avec
aside.
une sorte de
And there
pirouette
are,
scénaristique, mais
with our script, we
voilà, on peut
managed
pas
to
traiter le
mention
problème. Mais
these
c'est vrai que
themes, but not really
c'est une
deal
vraie
with the
question
problem.
d'écriture.
So
C'est-à-dire que
it's
à
all
ce
about,
moment-là se pose
and
la question de comment on va le
there's a
traiter,
question of how
du
we're
risque
going
qu'on
to
prend
work
à ne pas le
on
faire,
this risk of not
des réactions
mentioning certain
des
things,
communautés, etc.
and
Donc
what will the
c'est vrai
reactions in certain
c'est vrai que c'est
communities be.
des questions
So these are
qui se posent aujourd'hui.
questions that
Et moi,
come up today. and are
Je
present.
trouve que c'est bien
But
dans
I
certains
think it's a
sens.
good
Enfin, c'est
thing.
moi, c'est pas pour moi, c'est
For
pas une
me, it's
contrainte,
not a
ennuyeuse, quoi.
constraint
C'est une contrainte,
and something
que je
difficult.
prends en compte
It's
avec,
something I like to take into
voilà,
account.
il faut éviter de dire
We
des
just
conneries,
need
de
to
faire
avoid saying
voilà, de faire des problèmes
stupidities
dans les représentations des Indiens, ce genre de choses. C'est des
misrepresenting
problématiques
Native
qui me vont
Indians,
très bien, quoi.
for
Donc,
example.
en même temps, je dis indien, en même temps que je
I
dis faux,
say,
alors que je devrais pas le dire.
so I shouldn't
Mais enfin
say
bref,
Indian. In fact,
voilà.
I'm
Donc
saying it. So
je pense que c'est normal de travailler avec ces contraintes-là aujourd'hui.
I think it's normal to work with these constraints today.
Alors, je voulais encore parler
So
de deux angles, mais ça me permet de revenir
wanted
sur ces
to
contraintes
look
dont
at
on a parlé
other
avec les Anglais,
aspects
comme
with
on a
you,
parlé tout à l'heure, mais c'est vrai que
but it's true that for international distribution for some of our films, we are confronted to real difficulties. We now need to be extremely cautious. We need to be careful with the different behaviors, the protagonists in the stories, not only representation, but behaviors, role models, etc. So what is the role of that in your exchanges with distributors in order to be able to suggest different narrations, different stories, and to explore? You're asking me? Okay. So yes, there are a lot of barriers that need to be pushed aside, or obstacles. I think that the only thing we really take into account to not to censor too much. For the story in which a child died in Scotland, we were very careful not to show things on screen that children could reproduce dangerous things. So in the Cabane à Histoire, we clearly said we're not going to choose a book in which a child jumps out of the windows between the screen and real life. But there's a series on which I worked when I was a mini-maj with Canal Plus and the BBC. It was a comedy for older kids, and the BBC asked us for the character not to play cards, otherwise it would lead to too much, to an addiction, or sometimes it was not speaking about the dentist, or so we need to find a balance. But the real challenge is not to fall into an extreme politically correct. Otherwise, everything becomes impossible. It's like in 3D, where a lot of things are not possible. We need to find a compromise, and I think that, okay, now people are more careful, maybe thanks to social networks, but when we look at comments on social networks, we receive comments and people say, be careful if someone goes in the forest to take a walk, he needs to ask the parent, and the parent needs to say, please come back before nightfall, etc., etc. So children need to show care for one another, benevolence. Adults need to support children. So it's the same thing in Sweden. It's quite terrifying. For the Cabane à Histoire, we had an episode in which a child is ashamed of his teeth, and it was about accepting oneself. And for example, there's a book on the size of bottoms, and in Sweden they said, no, I cannot use this episode because we're not supposed to talk about physical descriptions, physical aspects. But no, you mustn't talk about it. You need to accept people as they are. So for me, it becomes a bit crazy. We cannot talk of things as they are. At school, it is quite obvious that people talk about the differences, and this is what is frightening in a way. It's becoming an automatic censorship to go towards an ideal world. And we try to fight to say things as they are by being as respectful as possible of everyone. So that's the first filter for broadcasters or channels or platforms. I wanted to ask you to close the loop and with the knowledge that you have of the reception of the films, whether in festivals, on TV platforms, in movie theaters, whether in France or abroad, what feedback have you received with your different projects? And there's another thing we mentioned before with Emmanuèle, talking about the increase in distribution of TV programs that are reorganized in films that are shown in theaters. So they have both distribution, both channels. So yes, GBK and KBO Kids who instaured this little by little. This helps us have a visibility. For Ernest and Célestine en Hiver, for example, there's a TV series, and we chose 4 episodes with the producers, with different elements, a lake, ice, etc. And it's a film in quotes, which found its audience. And what's interesting, it's a very French film, but little by little, we are noticing that it's shown in the Netherlands and Belgium, and it's an economy that is lesser. The budgets are smaller, of course, but it can be shown in schools and different centers for children. And this gives a possibility to show these beautiful films to different types of audiences. And even if they're not shown on TV, a teacher can have access to these films. So this is great. And it's very pleasant for us because for youth and animation, we're the poor parent of audiovisual. We are despised by cinema, by fiction, and a little, but so this makes it possible to show that there are great films and they can be visible on the big screen. Absolutely. Rémi, your film had a beginning of a career in autumn, and it was shown in festival. It won different prizes. So I hope for Calamity will continue its life cycle. And as Tout en haut du monde, maybe you talked about it in the beginning, what are the echoes you received? So when people go to the movie theaters, they're happy. The issue is to make them come to the movie theaters. Usually they're happy, but what's difficult is to convince them because of a certain standardization of image. The representation in animation today is films, as Mattheiu said, studio films, or the aesthetics of a studio. This aesthetics has imposed itself massively, and it's difficult to convince people that what we're going to tell them is going to sustain their interest. But it's for children mainly, and sometimes parents as well. But once they come to the movie theater, they're happy. And we see it with school children. One of the most demanded films in the different schemes for movies and schools. It's been working very well, and I regularly go to screenings to see the children, and they're happy, they're interested. Same with Calamity. I was lucky to, during the second lockdown, in the autumn, I went to 3 different screenings during the 15 days, and people were very happy. What's funny is that children do not speak of the graphic aspect at all. They talk about the colors, the landscapes, but adults are the ones who mention it. They talk about painting, so it's a sort of intellectualization. The children's focus on the story, and that is extremely interesting. Whenever something goes wrong in the film, you know it very quickly. And I know that there are scenes that are not working as well as they should. And I became aware of this while discussing with children. And they really have their advice and very precise idea of how they see things and with the feedback that they provide. It's always fascinating. So that's it for me, because it was impossible for me to travel internationally, travel abroad. So I made a lot of video sessions I had for the different festivals and saying thank you, we're happy to be here. Thank you for welcoming us, but I didn't meet anyone. And for Tout en haut du monde, I just had a child, a baby who had health issues, so it was difficult for me to travel, and I wasn't able to meet my international audience. What about social networks? Yes, we have a very good reputation. We have a fan base in Japan, and they send us a lot of, I forgot the word, fan art. So we know that it was a success, which is surprising. Well, it's surprising, and at the same time, it's not surprising because we're so influenced when we by their way of doing, and we belong to the same family in terms of animation and the way we move the characters. So we understand that they can relate to it, but their market is so saturated that we didn't expect to have this kind of success. They really were able to relate to our films, which is fantastic. For the rest, we are a niche, which means we have commercial results that are very weak in Belgium or other countries. This remains a niche film. We have a good reputation in animation professionals, but it is not translated by an specific interest of the audience. It's more an arts film. Yes, and special areas in Japan where it works very well. Yes, there's a huge audience for animation who really is interested, and this is the audience that we touch, of course, but for children, it is true that it is a niche film still. It was a very special year, of course. Yes, Tout en haut du monde, it was the same thing. We believe that with Tout en haut du monde, because of the subject on gender stereotypes, we will have a lot of school children who will see it, and we will have it. We were at 205,000 commercial numbers, now almost 600 today. So for schools, it's huge. Yes, we're really betting on the long term. That's an important aspect. What we count on is we start with small figures, and then on the long term, we can grow. We need to honor the art. They really work with their audiences, and so for the art rooms, art theaters, art houses, sorry, there's a real network of these houses, these art houses. And we are in a great situation, even in Europe. We are very lucky and say, yes, on different levels, we really realize it every day. And this is something that continues. I'm very thankful to our country and the way we're supported here.
Moi, je me souviens
Yes, I
je me souviens
remember
d'un film
a
sur lequel j'ai
film on
travaillé.
which I
On était,
worked.
on était
We were
11, de
11
11 nationalités
and
européennes
different
différentes à Paris,
nationalities, European
travaillant
nationalities
sur,
working in
enfin, on s'était
Paris.
retrouvés un jour à prendre des cours, quoi. Et
And we
on
realized this
on
while
travaillait sur
having
5
drinks.
films,
We were
je sais plus
working
quoi.
on
Enfin, il y
5
avait 5
different
longs métrages qui
films,
se faisaient, on
5
venait de 11 pays
films,
différents.
11
Et c'était tout à
countries,
Paris. Enfin,
and it
c'était
all
un
took
truc,
place in
c'était
Paris,
franchement nulle
which
part ailleurs, quoi.
never
Ça
happens
existe pas à Dublin,
anywhere
malgré
else.
Cartoon Saloon, ça existe pas
It
en
doesn't
Espagne,
happen in
ça existe nulle
Dublin,
part ailleurs en
in
Europe, quoi. Il y a
Spain
vraiment
or
un espèce
Europe, but
d'écosystème
there's a
ici
real
qui est quand
ecosystem
même assez
here, which is quite
Ouais,
impressive.
favorable.
Ouais.
Au Gobelin,
At
la
the
journée des Gobelins, la
Gobelin,
dernière fois où je suis allée, il y avait un film que j'ai adoré et en
there was,
parlant
I
avec eux,
saw a
c'était
film
7
that I
mecs, je crois,
loved.
qui l'ont
7
réalisé
guys
et
had
il n'y en avait
made
pas un
it,
seul Français.
not one
Ils
French
étaient tous
person.
d'Argentine,
They all came
d'Australie,
from
etc. Et
Argentina,
c'était fascinant de
Australia.
voir
It
qu'ils
was
étaient tous
fascinating
venus
to
au
see that
Gobelin
they
pour
came to
leur
the
film.
Gobelin to make their
Musicaux,
film.
ouais, qui sont très, très forts.
Yes,
Et
so
pour aller au bout
let's
du
really to
circuit,
close the loops
Mattheiu,
and to go.
du coup, tu es à la fois sorti en salle,
Mattheiu,
mais aussi pas mal
you
distribué en ligne
are
par
distributed
Netflix.
online and on
Et vous avez
Netflix, and
d'autres types de
you had
retours dans la
different
manière dont-
feedback.
Alors, comme
Yes,
pour
as
Rémi,
for
c'est une année
Rémi,
très
it's a very
particulière,
special
évidemment.
year, of
Le
course.
film est
The
sorti,
film
et
came
la
out
sortie, c'était en
in
France
France
le 5 août dernier,
in
2020.
August
Donc,
2020.
dans cette période un
So
peu
during
bizarre
this
de
very
réouverture,
strange period
il
of
y a certains pays dans lesquels
reopening,
il n'est pas encore
in
sorti
certain countries it
officiellement. Donc,
hasn't
c'était
come
en
out
Allemagne en salle, ça
first. It
sortira en
will
Chine cet été.
come out
Enfin,
in
il y a
China
énormément
this year. There are a lot of
distributeurs
distributors
qui ont repoussé la
who
sortie.
postponed
Bon, la chance qu'on a, c'est qu'on a des
the
distributeurs extrêmement fidèles, des distributeurs
presentation of the film.
extrêmement
So,
solides. On a livré notre
so
film en juin
we
dernier,
provided
juin
the film
2020,
in
en plein cœur
June. We delivered it
de la
during the
pandémie,
pandemic,
et on n'a pas un
and
seul
we have not
distributeur
one
qui a remis en
distributor
cause
who
la
questioned the
livraison,
delivery
l'événement, la sortie du
payment,
film. Donc ça a été
exit
assez
of the
formidable.
film. So that is great.
Certains le sortent dans les
And
semaines,
some
mois qui
are
viennent en salle.
going to release
Et
it
c'est vrai qu'on a
in
eu
the
la chance
coming weeks,
que
months. So
Netflix
we're very
aime
lucky.
le film
Netflix
et
loved the
l'achète
films and bought it.
pour
So
quelques
for
territoires
certain
qui sont les
territories,
territoires anglo-saxons, donc
the
États-Unis,
English
Canada,
territories,
Grande-Bretagne, Australie, Nouvelle-Zélande,
Australia, New
qui sont des
Zealand,
territoires qui ont toujours été extrêmement
these were
difficiles
very difficult territories
pour
for
l'animation
independent
indépendante
animation films or
européenne, enfin, pas
European,
seulement
not
européenne d'ailleurs,
only
pour toutes les
European, but
animations
any kind of
animées
animation.
un peu caricaturales, c'est soit vous
It's
êtes filmé,
either
vous êtes
you're a
sur la
studio
petit
and
écran et
you
pour plusieurs
can
dollars au minimum
have millions of dollars
frais de sortie,
for the
soit
release,
vous avez une
or
sortie
you have a
limitée
very
sur
small
une porte,
release.
mais il n'y a pas
But
d'intermédiaire.
there's
Et
no
donc pour nous, ces marchés-là étaient des marchés
middle. So these were very closed markets for us. And now Netflix and other platforms are great ways to show the films. So on a small screen, of course, but at least they can be seen. And it worked very well, extremely well. We were number one, not for animation films, but number one for all the Netflix programs in the United States for several consecutive days. We were in the top 10 for more than a month. And so it's a great satisfaction for our film to be seen and liked. Emmanuèle talked about stickiness before. It is a word that is used. And I have to admit that I'm proud that we had good results because people watched the film until the end. And we had few elements on the figures, but satisfying. So, and this year, this was at the same time fantastic for distributions in movie theaters. All the people who bought the films put the right means and the energy to release the films in the theaters. So that's a great promise for the future of the film. And we have a lot of faithful distributors who are going to show the films next year. And it is also a new opportunity with the platforms. It is another alternative for certain markets, because at times, for some projects, it was almost impossible to have the desired success in the theaters. So it's a hybrid mode that helps us have the best opportunities. And we have films that can have a long lifespan. They can, and it's a different circuit. It's not necessarily education or schools, but we have some films that have a really long life, 10 years for some, that are still shown on TV and around the world. And it's true that animation has this quality, and it is a quality. It ages well. It can continue to be broadcasted for a long time and to be shown. So as Rémi, we didn't have direct feedback from audiences, but it goes, the feedback goes through the distributors, since we have a close relationship with them. And besides selling the films, we work with them on marketing, promotion. We have received feedback to understand what worked well or less well, why it worked, and this gives us food for thought for the future. Thank you very much for this very rich discussion, and we see the diversity of our production, our works, our strategies, our proposals. And let's meet in Annecy for those who are coming, and good luck for your future projects to all of you. And with the different timelines, of course, but with UniFrance, we will be delighted to help and support you to go internationally, travel internationally. Thank you, UniFrance, for your great work. Thank you very much for those watching us. A great thanks. Bye-bye. Goodbye, everyone.